I have a question to start with. Fonzie, could you talk to us a little bit about, I really respect the Dark Noise Collective. Could you talk to people a little about what the Dark Noise Collective is?
Yeah. So the Dark Noise Collective is a group of 6 poets of color, and so we founded in 2012, and we basically, it's me, Jamila Woods, Dinesh Smith, Nate Marshall, Aaron Samuels, and Franny Choi. And a lot of us knew each other before, and we were talking about being young and trying to navigate the terrain of poetry and how it's kind of confusing and isolating and felt kind of lonely. So we came together and we didn't really know what we were doing, but we were like, let's just make a collective and see what happens. And so we've continued to be like a family and a really big support network for each other throughout the years, and have a lot of like, we just like help each other in terms of reading each other's manuscripts or going to conferences together, or like letting each other know about opportunities, and kind of just coming together twice a year to incubate our work. And so that's like a poetic home base and family that I am a part of. Any other questions?
Is it Phil?
Philip, yeah.
Phil. I was Philip. I was just wanting to ask. That you know, your poem about your dad and all the body, you know, the sort of leads to the word I think of as mutilation, but it seemed like you were making an analogy. I thought it was very good of the urban place like Chicago, as you know, deep and dark as Chicago is, especially to some like people from Wisconsin. No, I mean in the sense of, you know, where are all these streets going and where's all this construction going on, I thought you were making an analogy to an organism, like a body working. Was that your intention in that poem?
No, you're smart. I like that. Can I take that from you? Can I borrow that?
Well, I thought, you know, like, what's going to happen to that body? I'd like to ask you, you know, what's going to happen? Is it going to die? Is it going to continue? Or what's its fate?
We were having this conversation in the car about Chicago being...
Prophesy about Chicago.
Yeah, because it's a difficult city to navigate, of course, like, you know, geographically, streets and things, but also emotionally, psychologically, it can be a difficult place. I'm going to look at this just a little bit. So, I mean, in the poem where there are all these roads and names and things that are very, you know, personal or very, I should say, specific to Chicago, there's also the idea that some of the emotional textures that people have in Chicago are, you know, you have to be in Chicago to understand them. In particular with the idea that Chicago is this overly violent place. It's really not. It's particular sections, and they all have their historical reasons as to why they are the way they are. So I think in that poem, or with all poems, there is a kind of organic quality to, you know, making a poem, what a poem stands for, what it means. I consider poems to have their own bodies and personalities, so I love the way that you heard from me, you know, that kind of breath in the poem. I'll definitely say that's part of it, for sure. Yeah.
Other questions?
Tim and Susan, you guys want to explain a little more about this waddling dog architecture?
We were on a road trip. We went to a music festival in Oregon called Pickathon, and I don't like to fly. It's not that I'm afraid of flying, it's just that all the other crap you have to go through, I just don't do it anymore. And so we made a lot of side trips, and while we're driving on every highway, we always came to these, you know, world's largest elastic rubber band mall. And we would, you know, we didn't stop everywhere. We rode through mountains and ranges, and we kept looking up on our phones, what is this about? And we came with the Cataldo mission. It's in Cataldo, Idaho. It's a mission for the Coeur d'Alene Indians. And in the 1850s or 1860s, these Coeur d'Alene Indians invited the Jesuits to come meet with them because they were fascinated by these guys in robes that believed in a God and stuff. And so the Jesuits came to meet with the Coeur d'Alene Indians. And the head of the mission, and I forget his name off the top of my head, but he had the Coeur d'Alene Indians build this church And because he wanted the Indians to be part of the church in some way, and feel part of it by constructing it. They used a construction method called wattle and daub. Basically, what it's about 6,000 years old. Basically, you put up your foundation, and you build your walls out of twigs and branches and stuff, and then you throw stuff at it. You know, mud, dung, rocks, whatever, and that builds your walls there. And the Cataldo Mission, and the Coeur d'Alene Indian Mission, is the oldest building in Idaho. And so, so Wattle and Daub, we said, that's a band name. That's our band name.
We don't throw things at each other.
No, we don't. Not yet.
Other questions?
I've got one. I was wondering how young you were when you started writing poetry, and if there was a certain time, from then till now that you got more comfortable with the language, and were you able to use some of that language?
Yeah, I started writing poetry when, I wrote for a really long time. Like when I was in high school, I wrote Harry Potter sex fan fiction, so it was like the way that I started writing. And then when I got to college was when I started writing poetry. And so I was 17 when I went to school, and so that was when I started writing. And then I started but I just like write once in a while, and then I started taking it a little bit more seriously when I was a junior and a senior in college. And then I think that a relationship with language is just really, really fascinating. And like the longer you spend writing poetry, like the more you find your own poetic voice or the things that excite you about your voice. And I feel like I'm still always in the process of figuring that out. Like the book After it came out of a period, or after I had been in a relationship that had a lot of sexual assault in it. And so it was really, the book is very raw and it's very visceral because it's responding to that. And it's very different than the way that I write now. And that's because I'm writing, a lot of my poems are more narrative nostalgia now. And that's the terrain that I'm working with. And so I think that depending on the project or depending on what's needed, different aspects of your poetic voice come to the forefront when you're writing. And so I think I've also been a performer, and I perform poetry. That's how I started writing, was as a performance poet. And a lot of, for me, and I work with high school kids. I work for an organization called Young Chicago Authors, and we go out into high schools and we put on the nation's biggest youth poetry festival called Louder Than a Bomb, which is awesome. And also, you can walk into a classroom and it doesn't matter how many accolades you have, if you don't entertain the kids, you're not shit, right? They're not they're just I don't care. And so I think that there's a lot of too, how can I write language that's surprising to them, right? What happens then when I bring in a poem like The Playroom about my Barbies, right? And then they're like, oh crap, I didn't know you could write a poem like that. And it's yeah, you can, and I think that that's what I'm interested in, is how to create writing that I feel really proud of, but is also always accessible to my high school students.
Can you share a little bit more about what you did with the Bosnia?
Yeah, so when I graduated college, I went on a Fulbright to Bosnia, and I was there studying the way that art is impacted by violence. So looking at Bosnia's history with the genocide that happened and ethnic violence and the kind of fall of Yugoslavia and all of the different ways that violence impacted that region, but specifically thinking about the way that it impacted art, and then also how art then was used to memorialize conflict. So it was thinking about, just way that public space is transformed into sites of grieving when the whole community together is facing a public loss. So how can you turn art and parks and things like that into sites where people can be raw and open and grieve together in societies in which we don't really talk about grieving or death well. So that was what I was looking at, and I think Bosnia is just such a fascinating place, and it was a really interesting example. During the siege of Sarajevo, and that's where I was living, there's so many examples of ways that people used art as to basically go against or resist what was happening and not use violence. So for example, there was so many theater basements that happened, that sprung up, and so people, while the city was under siege, would risk their lives to go watch theater in a basement, right? Or, and they stage in a huge plaza, they stage Waiting for Godot as a kind of fuck you to the international community, as like, we're waiting for you, you know, we're sitting here waiting for you, literally risking our lives in open fire for you to see us doing this play, right? And then also a lot of women in Sarajevo did a show, they modeled underwear, and they were like, look at us, we're beautiful, we're worth saving, please save us, right? And that was literally what they were saying, was like, hey, we need your help, and we will do whatever we can to get your attention. And I think that that's just a really interesting, I'm talking for a long time, but that's just a really interesting thing about, you know, it's a really culturally rich place, and there was a lot I learned from my time there.
I was going to ask, so you mentioned Roger Reed, and he was actually here a couple years ago, and he was super inspiring to me. So I was just wondering, other influences, and that really could be for any of you, but just curious about what do you read?
A lot of stuff. More recently now, less poetry, more fiction, nonfiction essays. And I think it's because once I finished that book, I had to do other things. So Eula Biss as an essayist is really nice. Some of the older poets I've been reading, getting into Adrienne Rich, and she has a collective that's coming out this year. Should be fantastic. Frank Bedard has a collective also coming out. He's really good. My teacher from WashU, Carl Phillips, writes beautiful poems that deal with nature in a way I'm trying to figure out how to work into my own work. And also dance, like ballet, modern, in particular, thinking about how someone like Alonzo Kings of Lions Ballet, which is in the Bay Area, uses a kind of, what does he use? It's Afro-based, but it's also Asian-based dances too that he mixes with ballet, so it has a very fluid motion. I'm trying to see how I can work in a more like a somatic, how we use our bodies into the work so that the poems reflect, you know, how our bodies react to the things that we read. So yeah, I'm trying to move away from certain things and toward different things, but it requires to step out of the comfort zone that, you know, is the very medium in which I work. Like I have to stop using words and start looking at, you know, different elements, different arts. Yeah.
Philip, I was just, you had mentioned before that one poem of yours about how conversations about these difficult things are conversations we need to have, and I totally agree with you. But I mean, not that I don't even know if this is really a question, because I don't expect you to have a concrete answer, but I mean, I think a lot of people are afraid to bring up things like that on any end of the conversation because they don't want to come across as either angry or as trying to assuage their own guilt, you know? And so if there's anything else you wanted to say about that, I guess, was, you know...
Get angry, be angry,
yeah.
Express that. I mean, there's a difference between being angry and being violent, right?
Yeah.
So we can have these conversations, but we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. If we have to do that. Being uncomfortable does not mean one is under attack necessarily,
right.
And I think that goes with, you know, both sides. But even if we're talking about oppression, we have to always lean toward the side that has the power set against them. But if we're going to have a conversation and we have to leave space for that discomfort, we have to do that also when we talk about, you know, sexual violence, rape. We're going to be uncomfortable with these bodies that we have because that's how we've been trained in our society to cover up, be modest, things like that. And those words end up acting against us and we don't really pay attention to that. But discomfort and having comfort in that and knowing, you know, it could go any way, it could go in any direction, but that's okay. And if it does get too intense to walk away, but not to do it so prematurely, like let things happen, let people talk, you know, step up, step back. It just takes practice to do, and it's something that we just don't have a lot of practice in doing, and just being uncomfortable, and like this really feels shitty to have someone yelling at me or on either side, but maybe I'm going to learn something.
I think that might be a really good place to end things tonight. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to buy Philip's book, and we're going to buy Fosse's book, and we're going to tell all the performers how awesome they were.